Hey, everybody. Welcome tonight. I'm having a conversation with my friend James Tabler. Welcome on, James.
Thanks for having me.
Not a problem. So, James and I just kind of met online in various forums and discussion groups, and I've really thought he has an interesting perspective. Um, James, if you can't see this, is a black man, and I get a lot of calls that I'm some racist bigot and I need to listen to black people. So I decided, why don't I have a conversation with a black person? And specifically, I think that there are going to be people that I think might watch this, and because James has maybe more conservative views, that he's not a good representative of the black community.
Mm,
James sounds like he has some feelings on that.
I do. I get that often. I get that often.
How did you
Um,
feel? How did you feel when Joe Biden said that if you don't vote for him, you're not black?
well, I felt like I do when most people of a certain age with dementia speak out of place. You sort of let it go. Um, but in all reality, I mean, it's insulting. So, it's not the first time in history, though, that a white Democrat has felt as though they have the right to decide my views and define my race. It's a kind of been a theme for Democrats over the past few centuries to feel as though they have some sort of claim or ownership over black people. So it's not
Definitely.
surprising, but it's insulting.
Yeah,
I don't,
and it's one of those things that for me, you know, it's like listen to the black community, but what they're really saying is listen to a particular group
Mhm,
within the black community. Where
correct.
I say, why don't we listen to all black people? And then let's decide which ones have the best argument and that are putting out something that makes the most sense. Because ultimately, truth doesn't have a race attached to it, right? If
Thank
something's true, it's true whether it's coming from a black person, from a white person, from a trans person, from whoever it may be. So anyway, I thought that you have a very cool perspective, and I've just enjoyed a lot of the things you posted. But we were talking earlier today, and it was funny. I really liked what you said. You said you had a PhD in blackness. Um, and I thought that was cool. And then you started to tell me your story, and I was like, we gotta talk about your story when you come on. And so that's kind of what I want to do. So what I would like to do is to have you kind of tell your story of growing up, and I guess kind of how you got your PhD in blackness. And as we do, I'll chime in here and there.
Okay. Okay. So, let's see where to start. Let's start at just before birth. I come from a family that you've probably seen some movies about type of thing. My mom, father were both on drugs. Um, Actually, my mom was, on drugs while she was pregnant with me, and so, that was a hardship and something we've talked about. And just to clarify, I love my mom. She's an amazing person. She's done a lot of growing since then. We actually just recently talked, and I feel like our relationship is stronger than ever and getting stronger. But she made her share of mistakes, same as my father. They both struggle with drug addiction. When I was an infant, I'll give you an example. Um, she actually went on a bender and left us all at home alone. If it wasn't for my brothers, I'd probably be dead. They stayed there with me, made sure I was fed and clothed, and eventually we ended up moving with our grandmother. So, the typical sort of um, young male's black story, being raised by a single black woman. My grandmother, strongest woman I've ever known. God rest her soul, she recently passed away. But she did her best. But even with her best, I still grew up in basically a drug house. There was drugs in and out. There were drug addicts in and out. There were drug dealers in and out. So I kind of really had an opportunity to see what was going on. And so just sort of growing up in that environment, all my brothers were in and out of prison, in and out of jail, in and out of trouble with the cops. And so it was sort of like again, almost like the cliche what people think they know about a black person. You hear the story and you assume we're going to draw certain conclusions. But I just saw things a little differently growing up. I mean, I just remember observing my brothers and seeing the decisions they made and seeing the consequences at a very young age and just thinking, I don't really think I want to go that direction.
So
Uh,
so real quick, just to
Please.
chime in on that. Um, So, you were born into a home that really had a lot of problems. It was a fairly broken home.
Yeah.
How big of an effect do you think? Because that is, as you said, it's fairly typical. I mean, the Black community has a 70% and even higher in certain neighborhoods
Mhm.
single parent rate, which
Correct.
which is one of those things that I'm kind of like, it's heartbreaking. Okay, this is
Very-
something that obviously your life might have been very, very different if certain choices weren't made by certain people. And the amount of quote unquote privilege a person has, you know, I'll admit it. I'll be the first person to admit it. Like, my privilege came from my parents. My
Correct.
parents, they made certain choices, and that's the reason that I have privilege. And
Correct.
and my mother, just so you know, my mother was born of a single mother, alcoholic father, lived in a trailer park, and had I mean, heartbreaking stories that my siblings, we don't like to even talk about it. Sometimes it's just like breaks our heart that our mom went through that as a kid.
Mhm.
And yet people are like, oh, well, she's white. She has privilege, right? And it's just like, you don't know a person. Like, why would you assume that an individual person has privilege just because of their skin color? Or to think that someone like Obama's daughters, really? Are we going to go to them and I'm going to assume that they're oppressed just because they have black skin? Here's my thing. There are tons of people in the black community who don't have privilege. I agree 100%. But why are we making these assumptions about people simply because they have the color skin? Why don't we empathize with the poor white kid who also has a rough life and the poor black kid who has a rough life? Because the common denominator isn't skin color. The common
Mhm.
denominator is that they have a rough life. Why are we
Correct.
racializing it?
Because it's easy. And I think, and this is something I told somebody earlier. In fact, I think it was a post. I said, if you truly believe that racism is the real issue affecting Black America, then you've simply chosen to believe what's easy instead of what's right. The thing about that is when you have a demon or a devil, as most religions know it, it's super easy to sort of push off responsibility to that said devil.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, in our case, it's the white devil. No offense, but it's the
None taken. I've been called much worse.
actually seen on Facebook. uh, but it's so easy to sort of wrap it up in that sort of evil bow and say, oh well, I'm oppressed because of my skin color. Because sometimes it's difficult to admit that my parents made bad decisions because we think that that means our parents are bad parents. It doesn't. It just means they made bad decisions.
Yeah.
Again, my mom has completely turned her life around. She's an amazing woman.
Good
She
for
took
her.
care of me into her dying breath. She's an amazing woman, but she made her share of mistakes
Yeah.
and could have used that excuse growing up. I really, really could have. I heard people use it. But again, even as a child, I remember observing and hearing people say things like, oh, the white man this, the white man that, the white man this. And I remember thinking, like, you know what? I don't remember the white man being in my house when bad things were happening. You know what I mean? I don't remember the white man, making my uncles drink. I don't remember the white man making my brothers make bad decisions. I'm sorry, Jacob, but you weren't there. As much as some people might want to blame you, you actually weren't there. You're not omnipresent. You're not all powerful. White folks don't in fact rule the world as we say they do. You know what I mean?
Well, and one interesting stat was
Yeah.
that in 1960, or during Jim Crow,
Mhm.
in the 1950s, actually, during Jim Crow, the single parent rate was under 20%. That's lower than the white community today. Yet for
Correct.
me, they say it was racism that is causing the breakup of the black family. And I go, well, wait a minute. Why is it that when racism has been on the decline? Because I mean, we have to assume that today is not as racist as 1950.
Correct.
Okay.
It's accurate.
Yeah. I mean, that's just the facts. And so in the time when racism goes down, families get broken apart. And yet people say the black family is broken as a legacy of slavery.
Mm.
Thomas Sowell, I love, comes out and says, no, if you look at the data, it's the legacy of the welfare state.
Correct. We were married to the government. And if you haven't learned it by now, the government makes a bad father, and bad big brother. Okay, it's not very good at doing anything in all reality. That's why our founding fathers saw fit to keep it as small as possible. But what
Mhm.
happened in the black community was that you see that reverse of, actually we were even economically doing better in the 1950s than after the 1960s and early and mid 1970s. But once we were married to the government, there was this incentive for single motherhood. Well, it's just natural, you know what I mean? Natural instinct. If you don't have to take responsibility, why would you? If you know that if you don't pay these bills that Uncle Sam will, then why wouldn't you just keep spending all your money on what you want as a father, or your only goals, your selfishness and your own greed, as opposed to taking care of your children? There's no pressure. They're going to be fed anyway. You know what I mean? Why
Mhm.
would a woman decide, maybe I shouldn't sleep around? I really probably gonna get some flack for this, but why wouldn't she decide that if there's really no consequences, she can either A, abort, or B, just get money from the government. You know what I mean? Those are the options. So it created this incentive of single motherhood, and it also created an incentive for an absent father. So that's where it all really broke down. And from what I've seen so far, I'm always waiting for new information, but so far the hasn't presented
Well,
anything.
I encourage everyone. People kind of are like, "Oh, well, you need to listen to black people," and it's like, all right. Well, I've listened to Thomas Sowell. I've
Hmm.
listened to Larry Elder. I've listened to Walter Williams. I Most of the arguments I'm making are from the black people because I've tried to listen to all of them, and I'm not biased here. I mean, I read the new Jim Crow, right?
Hmm.
Like I'm listening to both sides of this argument, but the data is what it is. The facts are what they are. So anyway, to kind of go on with your story. So you're growing up young, you're seeing people making bad decisions. You kind of decide that that's not for you. Kind of go from there.
So one of the things initially, and again, we did speak about some of this earlier, but one of the things initially was that I just started again. It was just simple mathematics. I realized when people made certain decisions, there were certain consequences. So I decided I don't want to make them. A lot of people got in trouble, at the park playing basketball, smoking weed. So instead, I just decided I'll go fishing, and I ended up getting addicted to fishing. But that was sort of my escape from all that. It
I
wasn't
need
that.
your help. I need your help, by the way. I'm the worst fisherman. My little boy has cried multiple times when I've taken him fishing because we don't catch anything. And we have to go home. He's like, we didn't catch anything. I'm like, I know, I suck. I'm sorry. Anyway, sorry, little side note.
No, it's
So you got into fishing?
So yeah, I mean, I got into fishing. I was always into like snakes and spiders and things as a younger child. Those were just things I was interested in. But as I got older, it was fishing, and I can still remember when things sort of changed for me. The truth is I was always seen as somebody who could in school, but I never really did until late middle school, eighth grade, and it was due to a teacher of mine named Alan Fisk. He's actually one of my friends on Facebook. And I remember him using this word called class. And I just remember thinking, well, that's an interesting word. The way he used it, it wasn't like a class you go to, it was like having class. You know what I mean? And I'm like, I'm pretty sure I heard that in a movie. It's a very interesting concept. And I remember him sort of describing what it meant to carry yourself with class. And that was when it really began to mean something to me. And I remember thinking, yeah, I want to be somebody who is a respectable person. I want to be somebody who is seen as somebody who's trustworthy, somebody who's dependable. And to do that, I have to carry myself with class. So just to give you an idea about Mr. Fisk is, I'd say the first grading period, because we had 4 grading periods back then. The first 1 to 2, we basically hated each other. I mean, obviously he didn't hate me. I hated him. I thought he was just this mean person. And then we found out we liked fishing. And then through that, I found out he was not a mean person. He was actually one of the few white teachers who actually cared, who hadn't just written us off as dummies. You know what I mean? And because there was this attitude of why even try? Because if you try, they call you a racist. If you don't try, they call you racist. There was that sentiment there. And in fact, I can still recall.
Really? So the teachers would feel like
Darned if you
they
do.
yeah, and they like the people would consider them racist if they tried?
Yeah, if they actually said things of worth and actually criticized or confronted kids, they were sort of seen as like racist, basically. That was kind of almost like the sentiment.
Kind of like
Like,
if you have a teacher, a white teacher being hard on a black student,
Correct.
It's just you're a racist. That's why
Correct.
you're being mean to the black kid. When really, maybe the teacher's giving him life lessons. Like my dad, half the reason I am who I am is because he kicked me in the ass a little bit. And most of us know that. That's what a good father figure does. They don't they're not just your buddy. They're also you're kicking the ass when you need it.
Correct. And I don't get me wrong, we had great teachers, but there was just that sense of frustration there, that sense of no support at home. You know what I mean? And come to find out, here's the interesting thing about Mr. Fisk too. I met him, I believe, a year before he actually retired. So he was at the end of his career and he actually still wanted to help the kids. He'd been teaching for, I think he taught for 35, 36 years. I'm going by my memory, which it's been a while. So, but he actually cared. And, again, that was back in the day when a teacher, an older man could take a younger guy under his wing and it wasn't seen as something weird from Special Victims Unit.
Yeah.
So he actually bought me my first fly rod. I don't know if I mentioned that earlier, but he actually spent money out of his own pocket to buy me my first fly rod. He took me to like some really pristine sites. You know what I mean? Spent his own money, bought me lunch, all the whole night.
And what effect did that have on you? This father figure essentially coming in and coming into your life. What did that do for you?
Everything. I mean, it really, I know for a fact that it changed the course of my life. That was when I decided. It wasn't because before I was thinking, I was processing, right? Like a little computer. That's what we are. We're computers. We're supercomputers. So I was processing. I was still taking in data, but I hadn't completely reached a conclusion because I'd still dabble in the streets a little bit, just enough to survive. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Labeled as a complete punk or nothing like that. But that was when I decided. I want to have this type of life. You know what I mean? I want to have the type of life where I can be helpful, where I can be useful, where I can be productive, where I'm not always looking over my shoulder, worried about the cops.
And what do you think happens to young men who don't find a positive father figure? What do you think happens with them?
Interesting you say that. I'd actually like to tell a different story, a little bit of a side note. It'll help us to maybe understand. And I believe it was the outer parts of the Serengeti. Please don't quote me on this. I'm not a biologist.
You're fine.
But they were having an issue. They started finding corpses of all types of animals everywhere. They were finding like endangered species like rhinos, lions, everything, female elephants, everything. And what they found out was that due to poaching, all of the older bucks had been eliminated. And because of that, the younger bucks were running rampant. And I mean, they were killing everything in sight. Starting to ring a bell, like 6% of the population being black males, accounting for almost half of the murders in the country. No bucks there to sort of keep a sense of order. So what they did after this went on for too long, because they were losing endangered species again, was somebody had the bright idea. I don't remember who it was, but they had a bright idea to import bucks back into the area. They said, we have to eliminate poaching or these young bucks are going to kill everything, because even a young male elephant, still a good 10,000 pounds of fury. There's nothing you're going to do to stop them.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So they brought in older bucks. Wouldn't you know, within a little while, everything went right back to normal. It was as if nature had rebalanced itself by putting things back the way that God intended. And so we see the same thing in not just Black America, but inner city America.
Yes.
Where young males have no older figures, not to just beat the crap out of them. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about those systems of checks and balances, somebody we can relate to saying, hey, that urge you just had to punch that kid in the face? You don't actually have to give in to that urge. That urge that you had to say something inappropriate to that girl, you don't actually have to give in to that urge. In fact, the mark of a man is being able to control those urges, not simply having them, but being able to control them. And I think, I know that is what's happening in America now. Even these protests. I just want to give you another example real quick.
Yeah.
Look at this during the time of Dr. Martin Luther King. During a time where Black families still had fathers. There was order, there was structure. I'm not saying there wasn't some chaos. Please understand, there was still some chaos. But it wasn't like it is today. It wasn't accepted chaos. But now we have a fatherless generation, and we're not getting what we feel like we want. And so we're having a giant temper tantrum.
Wow, that's a great way of putting it. Because if you don't have a father there and then you feel like you're not getting what you want, you're not going to have the same response as, I know I wouldn't. You know what I
Correct.
mean? My father helped to temper me. He acted as that thing. And we all know this. I mean, all of
Mhm.
us instinctively know it, right? And this is the thing that people don't realize. And I constantly have to harp on this. There has never been a society in the history of the world ever that has had 70% of their children growing up without a father. This is a insane experiment, and we're watching what happens because and so anytime any analysis of the Black community that does not incorporate that statistical reality into the equation is simply misguided. It's like it, I just can't get over the fact that that can't be acknowledged, because it's to say it's, you're being racist and, you're blaming the victims, right? You're blaming, Black people are victims. And my thing is yes, they are victims. And I'd be a victim of my own not having a father. That'd be very, very hard. I'd have to work, I would be at a disadvantage if I didn't have that in my life. Right. And so anyway, it's just one of those things that bothers me that people, I mean, it's like they're like, yeah, that's a problem, but it's like down here. And I'm like, I don't care. This is another thing. So you mentioned white community as well. I don't want to just hammer this on Blacks. All population groups have had increases. I recently read a book called Coming Apart. And in the book, it's a look at white America and what has happened basically since the 1950s. And it basically divides white America into two groups: the upper class whites and then the lower class whites, right? So kind of the suburbanites and then inner city whites. And what's happening is that upper class whites essentially still have stable families. Okay. So suburban areas, still have two parents in the home, that kind of stuff. But when you go into the poor white neighborhoods, you see the exact same trends that happened with the Black community, and you see the exact same effects. These are not racial things. Correct. They are social things.
Yep. And that's the thing, is it comes back to what I said earlier about choosing to believe what's easy. And for us to accept that fatherlessness is what's really causing the issue is what makes people uncomfortable. And I believe one of the major reasons why is it puts responsibility on not only men, but another minority group, which is women. And nowadays it is unspeakable to tell a woman that she shouldn't have sex with whoever she wants, whenever she wants, however she wants. You know what I mean? That she shouldn't be responsible, because it's almost seen as an attack against her feminineness, against her womanhood. That's not the truth. I mean, I was raised to believe that the mark of a woman is that the fact that you have to earn her. She's a prize. If she's easy to get, then you know what I mean? It's kind of like, it's just the way God intended it. And again, I'm not here to slut shame or nothing like that. All I'm saying is that our actions have consequences. And when you repeatedly choose to have kids out of wedlock without a father figure, you are repeating the same mistake over and over and expecting a different result. It's insanity. I don't know if you are aware of this interesting statistic, but if you look at all of the mass school shootings, the mass shootings as they call them, if I'm not mistaken, I believe it's over 90% of these white males, just like you said earlier, didn't have fathers in the home.
Yep.
Of all these school shootings. In fact, if you look at a lot of mass acts of violence or terrorism, in almost every case, it's fatherlessness. In fact, on the flip side, if you look at the issues of out of wedlock children with women with girls with fathers in the home are less likely for that to happen. I'm not saying it can't happen. I'm not saying mistakes don't happen. We were all young and dumb at one point. There's nothing wrong with making honest mistakes. But when you continue to repeat the same thing over, and then you start glorifying it. So we glorified fatherlessness, we glorified single motherhood, and then we glorified reckless sexual behavior. You know what I mean? Again, I have my own beliefs. I'm not even the best at following mine. Let's just get real here. I struggle, but at the same time, in my mind and in my heart, I know what's right. And I'm not going to try to say that when I do something wrong, that then makes it right.
And that is so important, because you're so right. All of us struggle. The problem is when society stops the struggle and embraces irresponsible behavior, because then you really see the effects of it. Because it's kind of like, to speak in sort of Christian terms, it's to embrace your sin. It's not to struggle against it. And it's to call it what it is. It's like, this is bad, and it messes up society. And we see it happening, and all the statistics are there. And it's really sad that happens. I want to kind of keep rolling forward. So you're in high school, or you're in middle school, I think it was, when you met this teacher. You become friends with him. You kind of decide to get your life to take personal responsibility, which, by the way, I've noticed that those really great motivational Black speakers, or I really like Denzel Washington and stuff. I've listened to a lot of their kind of motivational stuff. What do they always talk about? They say it's personal responsibility. When you take account for your actions, you stop blaming the world. And everybody knows this. We all know this. We all know that if you take responsibility, you go listen to like Jocko Willink, who's a famous Navy SEAL, or what's his name? He's also a Navy SEAL. I can't remember his name right now. Black guy, does this long distance running. He also kind of same thing as Jocko Willink. Jocko Willink has a whole book written on extreme ownership. It's literally like, you take responsibility for your actions, even if other people are to blame. Because at the end of the day, you gain nothing from blaming others. And if you think about it, the narratives that are being put forth in the Black community are blame. It's the system. You can't make it. You can't get ahead. And to me, it's like, you want to cripple someone? You want to wreck their life?
Convince them they're disabled.
Yep. Tell them that they can't.
And here's one of my biggest things. I go back to crutches. I'll get back to my story here, but one of the things I've been thinking a lot about is crutches. If you've ever suffered an injury, especially to a lower limb or anything, you might need crutches. But everyone in the medical community knows that there is a point at which those crutches aren't helping anymore. And I think that's the point that we've come to. There was a time, I think, where we could say our struggles are due to racism. There was a time it was genuinely true. It was genuinely factually true. There was government policies. There was accepted systemic racism. It was very blatant, the things that we could not do.
Yep.
But then that was done. And I'm not saying it happened overnight. I'm not saying right after the Civil Rights Act, everything was just perfect. No, absolutely not. There was a period in which our parents and our parents' parents had to actually work, and they did the work. And now we're here, and we're still trying to use that same crutch. Well, if you use a crutch for too long, it can actually start to cripple you. It can cause from shoulder to knee to weak limbs. And the fact that your body is unlevel, I think I'm using the right term, it can actually cause severe back problems. A lot of people, but nobody wants to talk about that. I do want to get back to my story, though, because and I do believe in giving honor where honor is due. Again, I want to say for a fact, my grandmother did the best that she could. But just so you understand, on average, there was at least 5 young males and females in and out of the house. So my grandmother literally raised our entire family, which my family will openly say. But she did the best that she could. But it can never be enough because she's only one person.
Yeah.
And so Mr. Fisk came into my life. He never really beat me upside the head. He never really tried to force his views on me or nothing like that. It was just an example. He just showed me what we had in common, that we're not that different. We do have different backgrounds, but that we're just guys. We like fishing, and we're trying to make it in the world. Sometimes when you put things down to simple principles, it becomes so much easier to grasp or even imagine that you can succeed at it. And so anyway, after I met Mr. Fisk, my grades went up. I mean, that was the moment at which I don't think I ever got anything less than a C after that. Just to give you an idea of how big of an impact it had. So I get to high school, right? I get to high school, and wouldn't you know, instead of the 1 or 2 white people that were at my school, the 1 or 2 white kids at my school, there were loads of white kids at my school. So it was this whole different culture I was exposed to, where some of the things I like to do were also interesting to them. So I met other friends.
Real quick,
just
to kind of pause on that, on the demographics of your school. You said growing up, it was like you only saw white people on TV. I think you had said something like that.
Well, yeah. I mean, my mother tells me stories I was scared to let white people hold me as a baby. I mean, it was just so foreign to me. And again, I can remember the names of all the white kids at my middle school. There was Joey, there was Brett, there was Jenny, and there was this girl named Lindsay. And she had a brother. I actually can't remember his name, but I think he became famous or something.
Wow, that's you got your PhD in blackness right there. I do gotta say,
I could count the amount of white people that I actually knew on my one hand. So that's kind of how it was, But then I get to high school, and there's this whole other culture, and it's not. And here's the other thing too: not only was it just white people, but there were also black kids who came from really good homes. One girl, her name was Maya, absolutely beautiful, absolutely, she was extremely intelligent. I want to say her ACT score was like near perfect. I mean, she was extremely brilliant. And just to see that and be in that environment where intellect was fostered, I sort of like just blew up, you know what I mean? In a good way. I was just like, I became president of FCA, which I never was an athlete, but somebody needed to fill the shoes. And being that I was one of the, few kids who were even willing to take responsibility for anything, I stepped up and did it. And I did the same thing with the recycling program. And then I got involved in this organization called SOS. It stood for Saving Our Sons. And that was when my eyes really started to be open to some of the BS that was being spouted around. I remember sitting at this table. In fact, I believe it was downtown in our school board center. So where our school board was, I remember sitting there with mayors, judges, community leaders, Jewish leaders, Christian leaders, Muslim leaders, all types of leaders, high profile people. And I remember us sitting around and trying to figure out what we could do to help young Black males to integrate and survive the inner city, integrate into the workforce and survive the inner city. And I remember, there were the people who were, racism this, racism that, these cops are just after our boys and this and this and that and that. And I'm just like, I'm the kid in the corner, like, hey, do you guys have any stats or something we can look at? Almost like, is there anything measurable? Like, what's actually going on? Because you're saying one thing, you're saying another, but what's the actual facts? And when you started to look at the facts, it wasn't there. Were there racist people? Yes, I've met racist people. I've dealt with racism personally. It's very hurtful and it's very shameful. And I think people should change. I think we should be above that. But that wasn't what was really affecting the Black community, because I remember what I saw growing up. And that was that my brothers, whom I love very much, made bad decisions. And they could blame it on the fact that their father and our mother made bad decisions. But that didn't really work because I had the same mom. You know what I mean? So it was just like,
Yeah.
get that. But at some point, we have to take responsibility. And so what it really came down to, I'm just sitting there like, so what you're basically telling me is that we're failing because of our own bad decisions. So how can we take a young male who is constantly making bad decisions and convince him to make better decisions? And what we found out is there's a certain point where it's almost a point of no return. You can't make anybody do anything. That person within themselves has to take personal responsibility for it. And again, I remember it going back and forth between these extremely intelligent people and me just sitting there.
And for you, that moment was the mentorship of that teacher.
Correct. And it's not something you can replicate without two willing parties. You get what I mean? And so that was a big problem. It's like, okay, so we could have men mentor these kids, but they'd have to be Black men because they're not going to accept mentorship from a white man. And I remember thinking to myself, well, that's ridiculous. What difference does it make? You know what I mean? Even by then, I understood that most scientists with a microscope can't tell the difference between white and Black people. We're just people. But there was still that racial divide there.
And so it probably has to start, like you're saying, probably has to start fairly young. You can't, once a kid, I work with youth in the church. Right. And I know there's a big difference between working with the 14 and 13-year-olds versus working with the 16 and 17-year-olds. And you really got to make your impact early and do your mentorship early if you want those kids to stay on the right track, because no matter what you do, it's a struggle with teenagers to keep them to head in the right direction.
Correct. In fact, according to most child psychologists, or some child psychologists, a large portion of our personality and our character could be developed as early as age 4. So if we don't have that figure there to say, hey, every time you want to have a temper tantrum, doesn't mean you should, then we sort of go through life with that attitude. And this is something I saw growing up. I can still remember, I'd find a girl, I'd like her, but she'd have this temper. And I remember thinking to myself, why does this person believe that it's okay for them to hit someone simply because they're upset? And that was another thing I observed in the inner city, was people really thought that violence was an acceptable response to simply being upset. I'm 30 years old. Other than in my early childhood, I've never been in a fight that wasn't work related. And so it's hard for me to understand where somebody gets an idea like that. And to even say that out loud, I can still remember saying that and people being so upset. Well, well, he called her this word, or he called him this word, or something like that. And it's just like, well, that doesn't mean you can just react however you want. But again, that comes in, well, if you never had anybody there to teach you that, if all you had was one stressed out parent doing their very best and occasionally losing their crap, then of course you're going to replicate that without another parent there to bring balance,
Yeah.
because that's how it's supposed to be. No, that's not meant for one person. But the SOS, long story short, in my opinion, it was a complete flop because no one was really willing to take responsibility. Oh, and the best part is white people weren't really even allowed to contribute in a meaningful way, because if you said something critical, you were racist, which is B, because truth is truth. And that goes back to another post that I had made before, and that is that if you give black people a lower standard than white people, that's racist.
Yes.
A lot of people listen to black people. You just need to listen to black people. Well, you shouldn't listen to anyone if they're not making any sense. But simply because they're black, you're supposed to listen to them, believe them, and act on it, even if it makes no sense at all rationally. That's a lower standard. So
Yeah.
you mean to tell me because of my skin color, I have a lower standard? That's racism, and that's
The,
what a large
the
black
racism of low expectations is a real thing. And I always say this. I say there's two kinds of racists in this world. There are people who think black people are inferior and therefore they mistreat them. And there are people who
correct.
think black people are inferior and therefore they coddle them. And they see
Correct.
themselves as like, oh, I got to take care of you. You're not on the same level as me. You're just a black person. And that, to me, that the latter, the second one, is the one that I feel like I see all the time, because it's like, well, for you black people, we're going to treat you guys differently. We're going to lower these standards.
Hmm?
And then you act as though you're not being a racist by treating them like they're children.
Correct. When in fact, in my opinion, it's the most insulting. Okay, because if a guy comes up to me and says, and this has happened to me at a gas station, you fat bleep, it's like, oh, okay, bye, you bleep. Fine, it's a done deal, it's over. But for somebody to come up to me and say, look, I understand you can't really get an A in this class, so I'm just gonna up your grade a little bit because I understand things are rough for you. This happened to me. This literally happened to me.
Jeez.
I'm like, or you could just answer the question I just asked you, because the way you explained it to begin with just didn't make any sense. And that was the type of attitude, is this sort of snobby sense of superiority.
And I get
oh,
called a racist if I treat a black person the same way I treat I treat a black person the same way I treat a white person. If a black person has a bad argument, I'm calling it out. But if I call out a black person's bad argument, I'm a racist because of that. And so that's where this sort of racializing of everything, this identity politics, it just destroys truth. And when you destroy the truth, you destroy the ability to actually make change.
correct. And so then you have these coddlers, defending black people killing black people. You have defending black people burning down black businesses. And then I come in and ask them a simple question like, oh, how does this make sense? I'm not going to argue with you. But it wasn't an argument. I was just asking you, how does what you're saying make sense? If you saw a white person burning down a black person's business because they were upset, would that be an acceptable behavior? Well, absolutely not. In fact, if you saw a white person burning down a white person's business, would that be acceptable behavior? Absolutely not. And then, of course, the whole Black Lives Matter movement, which I think has the potential to really affect change. I see so much potential in that, but it's being wasted because nobody's willing to admit what the truth is. And that is that, how can you sit here and be so outraged that, and God rest his soul, he did not deserve to die. Let me preface it with that. But this man was not only a drug addict, but he actually threatened a woman. Mr. Floyd threatened a pregnant woman with a gun. He pointed a gun at her pregnant tummy. This is the sickest, most vile type of evil that I could imagine.
And why are you setting him up as the standard bearer of your movement, the hero?
Right. And just so you understand, over Memorial Day weekend, 3 children were shot. I believe one of them died so far. No outrage. And so you see these types of things that don't make sense. And if you call it out, which I did tonight, I actually called it out. I asked somebody about it. I was just really ticked off that kids are dying. Nobody's saying anything about it. But we have governors and leaders violating their own orders to give this man who threatened a pregnant woman a police burial.
Well, Yeah,
fine.
no, it's absurd, and it's insulting to the Black community, because it says that his life somehow matters more than those Black police officers that were killed, who
Correct.
spent their life serving their community and protecting Black lives from criminals who are 500 or more times more likely to kill a Black person than a rogue police officer. It's so upsetting to me, because I actually care about Black lives. And I've looked at where Black lives are lost, and I look at these business owners crying, Black business owners. Think about this, the irony and disgusting irony of a crowd, including white people, chanting Black Lives Matter as they burn a Black business owner's shop down. It's the height of insanity, and it hurts. It's like, these are real people. And here's what's really disgusting about it. This is where it turns from being sad to being angry, is that these people are being manipulated for political purposes.
Correct.
You want to know why they care about George Floyd's death and not the death of all of those people being killed in Chicago every single week? It's because there's a political advantage to be gained from it. And these disgusting liberals like Joe Biden go on and give this big thing. Why? Where are you every week in Chicago with those people that are dying? You say Black Lives Matter. They only matter when they're to your political advantage. And we all can see that. And Black lives only matter to white suburbanites when they can virtue signal over it and signal, hey guys, I'm not racist. I'm not racist. Black Lives Matter. And I'm just like, that is so demeaning and insulting to the actual Black community, the people who are struggling with these things. And then you guys are lying to them because there's a political advantage to lying to the Black community. Do you now, and I to kind of turn this back to you, sorry, my little rant there, but how do you see people taking advantage of the Black community for political gain?
Every way possible. Unfortunately, to put it blatantly, I think that Black people have become the political pimped, if you will. I don't want to use any other words just in case we have more sensitive viewers, but we're just being pimped out. You know what I mean? Every election year, this huge race issue. There's always something. Okay, so what they do is they take incomplete statistics. Like they'll say, well, Black people only make up 13% of the population, yet they account for almost half of police shootings. And what they willingly and knowingly leave out is the fact that, unfortunately, due to fatherlessness and due to broken homes, Black people also make up around, or even at times over, half of all violent crime. So that's going to increase the likelihood that we can be involved in violent situations with police officers. I'm not proud of that. It breaks my heart because, again, I grew up in the community. I know the hopes and dreams of the kids I grew up with, and I watched them burn to ash as they spent their lives in prison. So I get it. I mean, I was there. But then you have your Schumers, you have your Bidens. You know, if you're having trouble deciding if you want to vote for me or Trump, then you ain't Black. And then the guy who was on the other side, I honestly don't remember who he was. His reaction was minimal at best. Like, he really should have been pissed off about that. Yeah. But I think it's ridiculous that now it's to the point to where we're just being bought and paid for. You know, when it's gotten to the point, and let me say this, because again, I'm really about personal responsibility. We have to take responsibility because we are giving our votes to the highest bidder. You promise us free stuff, we'll vote for you. You know, if you tell us that we have the ability to do for ourselves, we've been convinced that you're a racist. And that's all been done through very careful media manipulation, where we have been brainwashed to believe that people who want to give us handouts and treat us like children are on our side. Yeah. And people who want to treat us like responsible, capable, brilliant, strong Americans, they're racists. Those are the evil ones. Those are the evil ones. That Trump increasing jobs, he's a racist. Well, why? Because he's employing us? Yeah. Jobs, highest wage percentage-wise that we've had in 50 years. So since the 50s, we haven't made this much money.
So I wanted to, and we're getting down to kind of the last 5 minutes here. I wanted to talk, just kind of to finish up, what do you kind of see as the solution, how do we reverse these trends? We talked a lot about some of the problems. How do we fix it?
So I'll just start off with what I believe. Okay, I believe that free speech is paramount. I believe that what Donald Trump is trying to do to protect free speech in online forums, social media, Twitter, Facebook, is paramount. The other thing I believe that needs to happen is you guys you got to do your part. White folks need to stop apologizing for speaking truth. You got to stop keeping your mouth shut, because there are enough intelligent people out there, white and black. There are enough brilliant black minds that if they simply had enough facts put in front of them enough times, that they could finally mentally cut through all the BS, they would actually hear you. But as long as we apologize, we're afraid of being called Uncle Toms, or being afraid of being called racists or sexists or whatever ist or ob is out there, then as long as we're silenced, then they'll win. The saying goes, all it takes for evil to succeed is for good men to be silent and to do nothing.
Yeah.
I'm paraphrasing there, but the idea is the same. If we stay silent, then nothing's going to happen. The other thing that we have to do is vote. One of the things I think has gone seriously wrong is, instead of voting based on measurable results like we would for any job. So if you have your own business, if you're going to hire somebody or you're going to decide who to promote, you're going to most likely do it on measurable statistics. Likeableness should also be a part of it.
Mm-hmm.
However, we need to start looking at this as job performance, okay? Because the simple fact of the matter is the government cannot fix our problems. The only reason for the government to exist is to protect our liberties. That's it. So we got to start voting for people who are actually looking to do that, protect our liberties. How are you going to do it? Well, you have people talk about cutting taxes. Well, that's going to cut, what do they call it? Entitlements. I'm sorry, but I don't feel that anybody that I did not create or marry is entitled to my money. There's no such thing as entitlements. There's no such thing as government funded anything. It's all taxpayer funded. So we got to speak out. We have to stop being afraid of being labeled, and we got to stop caring what the masses and what the sheep think.
And frankly, I'm glad you said that, because to me, that's the biggest wall I'm up against. It's the constant shaming of me. And I'm not attacking anyone personally. I'm speaking about the truth, what the data says, and I just constantly get told by white people mainly, you can't say that. Don't say that. And there's such a fear of speaking the truth that the truth gets suppressed. But I always tell people the most compassionate thing you can do for someone is tell them the truth. Because if we don't tell people the truth, then they're going to live in delusion. And they're going to do things. And here's the thing. If I believed the narrative, if I really believed that black people were being hunted down by the police, I'd be out there too. I'd be burning down the police station. I'd be mad.
Correct.
And that's the thing. Like you're saying that, oh no, you're fine. Yeah. The whole free speech thing is, you're exactly right. We need to protect our speech, and we need people to start speaking up and stop being afraid of the shamers out there. So we got about a minute left. I'll give you kind of the last little bit here.
I just want to kind of go off of that. And that is that we have to understand why people want to limit speech. Because if we continue to speak truth and people continue to believe truth, then the people who are profiting off of black ignorance will lose it. They'll lose their money. They'll lose their clout. They'll lose everything. Because if you really look at what the Democratic Party has been promising, they've been promising nothing that's measurable. Like, look at all their promises. Equality for women. What does that mean? What does it look like? Give me a number. We're gonna fight racism. Okay, give me a number of what that means. Does that mean more black employment? Does that mean higher black wages? How can we measure that? We really just need to start looking at the facts and understand that even those innocent seeming coddlers, what they're really afraid of is that if black people actually wake up, they're going to lose their pets. And I hate to put it so frankly, but that's what it really comes down to. Because if they don't have some poor sob story off ASPCA to look good about, then what do they have? They're left with that own feeling they have inside that they are just as incomplete as the rest of the world. So yeah. I want to finish with this though, real quick. I think, look at everything. The real problem is we've left out biblical principles.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And I would say that restoring the Black community is going to be about restoring those kind of principles, personal responsibility, living right. And when we start doing that, we're going to see things turn around. And I always say to Black people, what has the Democrat Party done for you? You guys have been voting for them for a long time. Things haven't changed. James, I want to thank you for coming on. Hope you have a great night.
Thank you. You too.